Bethesda was once one of the most celebrated studios in gaming. Coming off the back of releases like Fallout 4 and Skyrim, they had carved their place in history as the top dogs, which sadly just made their fall from grace in recent years even more painful to watch. With one game flopping after another and the once glowing reputation of the Fallout series in ruin, it seems this upcoming live action show is their attempt to reignite hype around the franchise, and it may be their last chance. You see, the first we heard about a Fallout TV series was way back in 2020 when Amazon announced they had purchased the rights to adapt the franchise into a series. People's reactions were middling, if they even heard about it in the first place. So many of these announcements go nowhere. People weren't ready to get their hopes up just yet. But now that it's been confirmed and the trailers are out, people only really want one thing: for the show to actually be good. You can almost taste people's hope for the series. Fans of Fallout have been starved of good content for such a long time now. Fallout 3 and New Vegas especially are masterpieces, but it was all downhill from there. While Fallout 4 did sell well and was pretty decent all around, it watered down the franchise's core mechanics. Then after years of hype and waiting, Fallout 76 and its disaster of a launch made things so much worse. The bugs and the broken promises alienated most of the people who bought into the marketing. Then the subpar gameplay and lack of single player doomed it to mediocrity.
People start logging into the hellscape that is Fallout 76. And oh dear lord, they never fix the bugs. And there are so many of them. Goodbye world, goodbye necks, goodbye body, goodbye heads, bugs, bugs, bugs everywhere. Server crashes, game crashes, old bugs import from Fallout 4. Use more than one nuke at a time, server's dead. Textures far too texturous, an all-consuming void. Errorlog 307.
If this is yet another disappointment, then they might be waiting years for the next roll of the dice. And so you can't be surprised that people are still pretty skeptical about the show. There's a few different reasons you shouldn't put all your money on Fallout breaking the box office. The Fallout games haven't enjoyed much recent success for one. The most recent game in the franchise, Fallout 76, had a disastrous launch, game-breaking bugs, and was full of greedy microtransactions. Despite a few updates since then, the game has still left people hungry for some actual Fallout content, whatever form it may take. In the early 2000s, right up until the late 2010s, there pretty much weren't any good movies or shows based on video games. Studios just didn't know what to do with them. There's the Resident Evil films, and maybe a few others like Warcraft or the 2001 Tomb Raider film, but other than a few middling flings, cinema and TV executives pretty much ignored an industry worth tens to hundreds of billions. This has changed over the past few years. The pandemic put a lot more attention on video games, and studio executives finally realized there was actually some money to be made. By taking properties of video games which had a track record for popularity, studios could be sure of an audience and waiting for their project. The slower video game adaptations we're seeing today are here for the same reason Hollywood loves sequels and cinematic universes so much. It's easier than coming up with something new. At least it might seem that way from the surface, but all the years of mediocre attempts and low profit margins taught studios that it was actually much harder than they thought. It was only recently that they've actually finally taken the plunge, maybe only after running out of easy prequels to make. Films like Uncharted and the Mario and Sonic movies have shown what video game fans have always known, that there's a huge gap in the market. But probably the biggest competition the Fallout series will have is The Last of Us. They're both post-apocalyptic TV shows, based on video games to name just the most basic similarities. And considering how excellent The Last of Us was, Fallout already has a ton to live up to. One key difference though is that Fallout won't be taking the same route with its story. Instead of directly adapting the game's plot, Fallout would tell its own original canon story, set within the same universe. There will be a bunch of callbacks and similarities to be sure. The trailer deliberately holds on the bobblehead, and there's the classic sentry gun that misses all of its shots. Then there's a crater with a shady sand side outside, although it's hard to tell whether it's the ruins of the same town from the game. The director Jonathan Nolan has already stated his favorite game was Fallout 3, and a lot of the sets we've seen are almost carbon copies of Fallout 4's design. Some people have said the setting feels too bright, others say it's too dark. It can't be doubted though that it looks like it just came straight from the same universe. But including Easter eggs, giving things recognizable names and writing and cameos can only get you so far. None of this alone will make it a good show. Fallout will need to actually capture the heart of the games. Some news about the game has made it seem like this might be a long shot. The director Jonathan Nolan has made the same kind of comments you'd often hear from directors before they release a flop. Specifically in an interview, he directly stated that trying to please the fans was a fool's errand, and that he wasn't going to try. It might remind you of another video game series that lost its way. The Witcher series started out well, faithfully adding to the source material and keeping the essence of the game, whilst remaining accessible to a new audience. But after season 1, the show started going completely downhill.
Season 1 of The Witcher had an 89% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which was higher than the critic score. Then season 2 dipped almost 50% to 56%, and season 3 has dipped more than 50% from the 56% at 22%.
The numbers don't lie!
despite the attempts of Henry Cavill to keep it on track. The rumors were that Cavill had clashed with showrunners and executives because they were pushing the show away from what the Witcher series was really about. Even if these claims aren't true, it's still odd that Cavill's departure coincides with the show's departure from the source material. Fallout will have to avoid all of the same pitfalls, and it's hard to see Ella Purnell pulling off the lead role as well as Cavill did with the Witcher series. Hopefully she can lean on Walton Goggins if she had trouble coming into her own, but there still might be something to be said for avoiding the usual pandering and fan service that often seems like an easy solution for middling directors. The fact that the Fallout show will be following the games is a good sign that they'll need to stay true to the universe and its themes. If the series doesn't find popularity, it'll be yet another reason for studios to take games more seriously. It'll definitely lead to a sequel, as well as other developers and publishers making deals with the movie studios. Modern AAA games have been obsessed with delivering a cinematic experience for years now, and hopefully now that they can actually do that, the industry will evolve and get better overall. For the movie industry, on the other hand, video games seem like they might give them an easy out for the creative dead end so many studios have run into. They've squeezed so much out of comics, you can imagine why they might jump ship. Games give them a whole world of characters, stories, and settings that they can plunder for the cookie-cutter scripts and ham-fisted messages. Whilst they might think it's easy money, they probably don't realize how prickly and particular gaming audiences can be. If Disney does the same thing to games that they've done to Marvel, Star Wars, and their own properties, they're going to end up losing even more money than they are right now. But we're still early on in the cycle, and the days of nearly every adaptation flopping will still be fresh in the executives' minds. There's clearly money to be made, but they'll need to respect the existing canon and themes to get it. So what specifically does the show need to capture to make it a good adaptation of the series? Sure, there's the aesthetics and the overall themes and the dark humor, but one part of what's made the most recent Fallout games so successful is the gameplay loop, and that might be a bit trickier to put in a TV show. People can put hundreds of hours into New Vegas or Fallout 4 because of the seamless cycle between three main phases of gameplay. You start out with the exploration, going through the world, taking in the unique locations and stories behind them. Fallout has always excelled at atmospheric storytelling, and so the series will need to do this as well. Inevitably, you run into enemies and get into combat. Even just a few standout action scenes with raiders and mutated monsters would go a long way towards checking this box. Then lastly, there's the rewards, which in the games is loot. In the show, this will be tricky to replicate, but you can imagine character development standing in. It might literally be the case that real rewards are the lessons the characters will learn along the way. You can see how Fallout would take the surface level loop of the games and make it work in the medium of film in this way, but it's hard to imagine it going much further than that. This is a struggle that video game adaptations often face with translating the core game mechanics. The Mario movie would have sucked if he just ran in one direction jumping on Goober's heads. Instead, they have a couple scenes of that, but the rest is just like an actual movie. In other properties though, it's often visible in the main characters. When you're playing The Last of Us, you don't look twice at Joel gunning down 20 people without breaking a sweat. The realism gives way to the gameplay mechanics in this way, but it's par for the course with games as a medium. But you can't have characters who are this powerful all the time in a film or a TV show. We spend the whole of the series building up to the scene where Joel goes on a rampage on the hospital to save Ellie. It's actually cathartic to see the video game logic take over for once, but Fallout probably won't be doing this. Instead, it looks like it'll be following the Mario template instead. By setting itself up as a canon story working outside of the rules of the games, we won't need to constantly be suspending our disbelief over how incompetent the film characters seem in comparison to how they would perform in the games. But obviously that isn't all the show will need to capture the essence of Fallout and make itself a good addition to the canon. So what can the various trailers tell us about the show? At a very basic level, it looks like we're going to get 3 different people's stories that come together over the course of the show. First is the Vault Dweller, played by Ella Purnell. We already know that she'll be naive, a fish out of the water character for the audience to relate to. It's a common way for the shows to introduce people to the universe by making the main character just as clueless as they are about what's going on. They become a surrogate for the audience's understanding. Obviously for fans of the games, it might be a little bit redundant, but you can imagine the showrunners and the writers thought it would be necessary for wider appeal. And even existing fans of franchises enjoy seeing their favourite worlds brought to life or reimagined in movies. In the teaser trailer, we see her helping a woman fix a pipe and generally living the idyllic life the Vault Tech promised. But there's also a scene of the same woman she posed with firing a machine gun with a fork embedded in her eye. You can imagine something goes a bit wrong. It's not a great leap to say Ella Purnell's character will be leaving the vault to find some solution for the carnage. She seems like she's leaving against her will to save the people left behind, judging by the tearful goodbye scene we get a sneak peek at. Then there's Walton Goggins, who will be playing a ghoul cowboy kind of character. It's clear the game is taking inspiration from New Vegas with a lot of what we've seen. We know there's at least some attention put on the day the bombs drop. We see Walton Goggins holding a child in his arms as one goes off behind them. Hopefully these scenes will be as effective as the pre-apocalypse scenes from The Last of Us. You can guess that he might still be searching for that kid, hoping that she becomes a ghoul as well, but it's pretty much certain he'll will act as a grizzled, veteran counterweight to the Vault Dweller's innocence as he walks her through the dangers of the wasteland. Finally, there's the Brotherhood of Steel Soldier, played by Aaron Rutan, who we see both as a kid and an adult in full power armor. We know that he's going to be called Maximus, and that the game takes place around 15 years after New Vegas. In that game, one proto-country called the Legion were battling it out with another country called the NCR for the Hoover Dam and the New Vegas Strip. The Brotherhood of Steel, a kind of technology-hoarding military cult, were a small group hiding inside a bunker. Maximus could have been born under the Legion, then adopted by the Brotherhood early in his life after the NCR destroyed his home. Depending on how closely the show follows New Vegas' plotline and the events in the game, we could see what the canon ending actually looks like. Lots of people were quick to point out how the Brotherhood really shouldn't have been there in full force. They were hermits just over a decade before New Vegas, so this could be a different chapter altogether. But all of these gripes and holes in the lore won't really matter in the long run if the series is actually good. You can forgive a few little retcons or inaccuracies if the ends justify the means. The Fallout series is so iconic that it would take much more than a botched Amazon show to wipe out the interest in it. However poorly it might perform, Bethesda are gambling that it won't make much of an impact on the sales of their next Fallout game. But if the show succeeds, it could give the next game a boost in sales from new people interested in the universe. We've talked about studios and movie executives looking to gaming for their next project, but is it going to start going the other way? Jim Ryan, the CEO of PlayStation, stated that every time a new The Last of Us episode was released, they saw a huge sales spike for the games. And you can be sure that Bethesda are hoping for the same thing with their new show. Their only problem is that their most modern Fallout game has such a bad reputation that it's unlikely to happen. Instead, Obsidian's Fallout New Vegas will probably see the most spikes in sales, despite being released nearly 15 years ago. The setting is far more similar, and you can clearly see the inspiration from that game in the show itself. So whilst Todd Howard and all the other Bethesda executives might be hoping for a big boost to their revenue this quarter, it probably won't come from their recent games. In fact, the hype for the show is directly linked to how poor the recent Fallout games have been. As for the actual themes that underpin the Fallout series, there's a bunch of potential there. You can tell at least the content is going to be somewhat dark. The trailers give us enough scenes of violence and carnage to make that almost certain, but there's plenty of dark settings around. What makes Fallout different is the light sprinkling of dark and absurd humor on top of all of this. We can already spot some signs of progression to the Vault Dweller's character through what the trailer shows us. In one snippet, we see her flinching away from Tumbleweed. Then in another part, we see her getting taken captive, and scenes presumably from even later on that show us her with some serious wounds. You can imagine she'll start to doubt the indoctrination she received in the Vault, and it might interfere with her overall goal to save her home. This is where two more themes that underline Fallout could be expressed. The first is rebirth, of trying to overcome the sins of the old world that lead to its destruction and make something new. This is likely a struggle that the Vault Dweller will go through. As she inevitably learns the truth behind how corrupt and cruel Vault Tech were, will she still go back to help save the Vault? Of course, whatever personal development the characters in any Fallout game make is always stunted by how messed up the world will still be. Often their plans reflect this, hoping to change the world for the better, but it rarely works out. Humanity itself and the war never changes. The cycle of conflict always goes on, but the people who fight those wars are changed forever. Because of all the different plans the factions in the series have for what to do with the new world, conflict is inevitable. It seems like we'll be seeing a war between a faltering NCR and a resurgent Brotherhood of Steel in the show. Maximus and his line of wanting to hurt the people who hurt him plays right into this. We're pretty likely to see him battle with whether he should continue the cycle of revenge and violence by continuing his life in the Brotherhood or painfully leave it all behind. All of these themes aren't unique to Fallout itself, but it does package them in a unique way. Combining the sickly sweet aesthetic of the 50s with the decay and destruction of the wasteland is itself an analogy. It's an expression of the logical end of the forces that moved the world at that time. Cold War paranoia, aggression, and consumerism brought the world to ruin. When we look back at that time, it is easy to see it with rose-tinted glasses. It was the time where the American dream really felt the most real. You could build a life full of love in a large home in white picketed paradise with only one income. As long as you forget about all the social issues, the suffering, and the threat of imminent destruction, it looks like a paradise. In Fallout, those layers of glossy paint have been scratched away and left to rot, leaving us with the reality of what that period easily could have become. But despite how harsh and unforgiving the world might be in Fallout, or any other post-apocalyptic dystopia, you can't deny there's something desirable about it. It's not just that it makes you feel better about the world you live in to see one that's even worse than ours. People long for the freedom of having all of society's constraints wiped away. In the Wasteland, you can truly be whoever you want to be. The rules are simpler because there's only really one rule left: survival of the fittest. It offers the kind of harsh test that we're naturally built for, but actually lack in our modern lives. Fallout is so popular and long-lasting because it's one of the best ways to escape from our lives and experience that lost reality. Control over your path and who you are is given back to you, and you're let loose to see how that would play out. But even then, all of those problems that we're running away from end up still being there in the Fallout universe. Despite the collapse of one society, each faction represents a different attempt at trying to resurrect some lost part of it. Each one might be trying to build something new, but they're never truly successful because war never changes. The problems with society and the people placed within it are still all the same. It's the human paradox. Even if the show properly knows and expresses this, it still might fall short of the games. That interactivity and the ability to go on your own journey are so key to the Fallout experience. It's really hard to imagine that vicariously experiencing them through the show will really be the same. Things like the character creator, how your character's specific traits impact the gameplay and the choices you make, that will make the freedom and the message of Fallout. We'll have to wait and see how essential it really is, and if the show can truly deliver them. Taking all of this into account, what does Fallout have to compete with? Over April, when Fallout will release, the schedule is surprisingly sparse. A series called The Sympathizer will be releasing just 2 days later, with Robert Downey Jr. starring as a spy during the Vietnamese War. Despite the big name, there's barely been any hype around this compared to Fallout. Other than this though, it's far harder to know which series everyone's going to be talking about compared to films. Fallout has got a clear runaway, it just needs to stick to the landing. There are a few things that could ruin Amazon's hopes for more seasons though. Obviously if it ends up being a flop, then we won't see any sequels. Director Jonathan Nolan has a mixed history on this count. While he did direct an excellent first season of Westworld, 2, 3 and 4 failed to keep up the momentum and the show slowly lost the plot. However, shows that are good all the way through are incredibly rare, while shows that have a good first season come out all the time. There's a good chance Fallout will at least fit into the second category. But the show might also dip into the same tired character tropes that we've seen time and time again. But so far, it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. The naive vault dweller who doesn't understand the world at all doesn't really fit into the Mary Sue archetype that Disney are so fond of. We can only hope the political message of the show is intelligent and subtle enough not to feel forced. The Fallout games nearly always had some political allegories and messages in them. People are still arguing today about which faction from New Vegas was actually the best for the people. The whole series just satirizes American consumerism through the pre-war society and shows us the dark path it leads us down. But to be truly inauthentic to the game would be to throw all of that away and just make it to tell the same one-note story that every modern Disney or Marvel film offers. The trailer certainly doesn't indicate it's going to go down this route at the very least. With Bethesda nearly completely out of the picture on this one, and with Fallout entering a new medium, it looks entirely possible that the new series could live up to its namesake. The only thing left to do is see whether it will live up to all of the expectations.